Since the courts stymied those efforts, Republicans have tried to manipulate the Electoral College system to their advantage in several blue states controlled by red legislatures. While those efforts went nowhere in Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Virginia, in Pennsylvania, the campaign to rig the vote is forging ahead. Senate Republicans in the Keystone State are bringing a bill to the floor this month that would apportion Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes based on the state's popular vote total. As a reminder, in 2012, President Obama took all 20 of Pennsylvania's electoral votes. But under the GOP scenario, he would have won just 12, with Mitt Romney taking the remaining 8. Whether or not the game-changing effort gains national traction, Republican panic over an increasingly small piece of the American electorate remains a motivating factor in all manner of manipulation. In this week's edition of New York Magazine, Jonathan Chait writes, "This plot did not come out of nowhere, and it is not merely an exercise in momentary partisan opportunism. It is the expression of a durable American political tradition of skepticism of democracy, or, to put it more charitably, skepticism of majoritarian democracy. And as the Republican Party comes to grips with an increasingly hostile public, this tradition is coming to the fore." Joining us now to discuss is the president of the Brennan Center for Justice, Michael Waldman. Michael, I feel like there is panic out there among the electorate, and we bring you in as our panic expert.
Exactly. Demographic panic.
Yeah, exactly. We hit the demographic panic button and you appear in a cloud of smoke. I think Jonathan raises, it's an incredible piece, a really good analysis in New York Magazine, but it sort of puts us in the larger context of sort of Republican maneuvers to cement more power for an increasingly smaller piece of the American electorate, which is to say almost the minority piece, and not minority in the traditional sense, but minority in terms of white, rural, conservative voters who are no longer that representative of America.
It really is the case, number one, that the country is going through significant demographic changes, as it often has, but it's really happening in front of our eyes right now. And at the same time, you see this sudden surge in new laws and new efforts to change the rules, to make it harder for some people to vote, to entrench, in a sense, minority political power in ways that hadn't been the case before. And you might put those things together and see it, one as the reaction to the other. What's interesting is, look, there have been other realignments, there have been other challenges to political parties. As you may know, I worked for Bill Clinton in the early 1990s, and the Democrats felt locked out of the White House just as much as the Republicans might think they are now, but they didn't try to rig the rules. They actually changed policy positions. Some of the changes Clinton pushed were controversial with other Democrats, but ultimately that's the way to stay a robust party able to compete for a new country. And, you know, it is a new country. It's more diverse. It's more urban. We have had moves to the cities for years, but then they moved out to the suburbs. Now even the suburbs are moving back to the cities. So this is the future of the country, and we need everybody to be playing for that broad majority.
Well, and Michael, when we talk about the Republicans building a bigger tent, so we just finished talking about immigration, and it seems like there, whether it's Eric Cantor or Marco Rubio, there are voices that want to be more inclusive, quote unquote, whether now or later. The reality, though, is that in a parallel track, you have GOP governors who are pursuing changes to the Electoral College system. The redistricting in 2010 sort of cemented red versus blue rather than anything purple. There is the filibuster, the use of the filibuster, which Jonathan says basically it's a unusually powerful tool as it is in the hands of Senate Republicans. And then there's the voter ID stuff. So on one hand, yes, the Republican Party wants to be more inclusive, but at the same time, they're trying to manipulate the rules in a way that gives people less of a place at the table, if you will.
And that's politics. And I don't know why we act so surprised when people engage in some of the art craft of obtaining, maintaining, and controlling power. You talk about redistricting. Well, Democrats held the Congress for 40 years. How do you think they did that?
No.
It was through, it was through the redistricting process. So having had a hand in creating the new maps and focusing on state legislative races around the country, like a Wisconsin, the goal was to help the party get its ground game in place, organize, and put in place those controls. So, that's part of the process. Where I draw the line is I think the core point you're asking, a question you're asking is is this about really just power for the sake of power, or do you recognize how this is being perceived and being read by the public at large?
And the very people that you were trying to entice into the party
feel alienated by a process in which you then change the rules of voting in the year of the vote, where you change the rules of engagement of election results immediately after because you didn't like the results of the election. And so that perception that's being created out there for the party, I think, is a very dangerous one. And to Michael's point, makes it much harder for the party to expand its base.
The New York Times, Joy, writes, several recent polls and studies suggest that long waiting times in some places depressed turnout in 2012 and that lines were longest in cities where Democrats outnumber Republicans. A MIT analysis determined that blacks and Hispanics waited nearly twice as long in line to vote on average than whites.
Right, and I don't think this is politics as usual. I mean, Jim Greer, the former head of the Republican Party of Florida, I've interviewed him. He's given other interviews where he's admitted that they literally talked about the fact that we can't get minorities to vote for us. Let's find a way to dilute their vote. Let's find a way to make it harder for them to vote. This is an active policy. Reince Priebus, when he was the head of the Wisconsin Republican Party, expressed a lot of enthusiasm for things like voter ID that would just keep those folks from the polls. There was this expression of shock by the Paul Ryan that, oh my goodness, the urban areas turned out in such great numbers. What can we do about that? And, you know, Democrats are the urban party. Republicans are essentially the rural party. So now they're saying, well, we need to give rural people 1.5 votes. We need to use this scheme to essentially make the Electoral College reward people who live in places where there are fewer people. This is anti-democratic. It is not, to me, politics as usual. And the Republican governors get it, because you just read off, Alex, a list of governors who have said maybe not, because they're up in 14. They're up in 2014, and they realize they might get punished for it.
But a Governor McDonnell is not up in 2014, and I think he made a principled argument.
He's up in 2016.
He's up in 16 in a presidential year.
He's a one-term.
He's a one-term governor.
I'm saying national ambitions.
But the 2 years between 14 and 16 is a long time in politics, and a lot will happen. But I think he made a very principled argument that the party should take heed of, and that a lot of the other governors out there should take heed of. That which you control today, you may not come the next election if the voters deem your actions to be hostile to their interests.
But we're also talking, Garance, about a sort of, I mean, these are sort of identity shifts. And I'll read an excerpt from The Atlantic, which talks about the urban-rural divide. And it says, the new political divide is a stark division between cities and what remains of the countryside. The difference is no longer about where people live. It's about how people live. In spread out, open, low-density privacy, or amid rough and tumble, in-your-face population density and diverse communities that enforce a lower common denominator of tolerance among its inhabitants.
No, absolutely. And I think this is actually kind of politics as usual in American history, which is that the effort has always been to suppress and diminish the voting power of minorities in this country. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is that the Democrats have more people to bring off the sidelines and into the voting booth.
Well, that's Obama's coalition.
Right, exactly. And so it creates a problem for the Republicans, because they can't just, organize their way to overcome this without changing positions.
Well, I mean, let's look at this map, Michael. This is a 3D map that was not created by us here at MSNBC, but is an awesome map anyway. Can we show someone? Yes, there we go. Look at that. The skyrocketing growth is in urban and coastal areas, which is precisely where Republicans are trying to suppress the vote, or trying to make it have less sort of impact in the Electoral College.
It looks like the skyscrapers that people isn't working.
Yes.
But look, we've always had these divisions. There was a time when the Democrats controlled, the white Democrats controlled the rural South, but there were lots of urban Republicans like Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
And Thomas Dewey in New York. And the fact is, this is the country we're in and the country we're moving to. And over time, yes, obviously, there have been all these efforts to make it harder for people to vote. But over centuries, the broad direction has been to make it easier to vote. And so it isn't the same as kind of normal gerrymandering, which both parties try to do, to try to make it suddenly harder for a lot of Americans to vote, especially people of color or young people, really turns back the clock in a way that isn't just the normal kind of push and pull of everybody wants an advantage.
Let me ask you, too, in terms of change.
And I think it's a loser.
In terms of changes to the Electoral College system, that seems fairly, I mean, that's a real line in the sand. And moving forward or walking back changes to law like that.
That's a big one. Look, I'm for national popular vote. I think we should have it by who wins the majority vote. But you can't just do it in states that tilt toward the Republicans or the Democrats. That's like telling one team they can use steroids and the other one they can't. That's what's happened now. So, you know, that's what the new Pennsylvania proposal is, that in Pennsylvania they would allocate it by proportional representation, but in Texas the Republican presumably would still get all the votes.
Right.
So again, it's like a good idea dressed up. It's a bad idea dressed up like a good idea.
It's a good one. You can't put lipstick on a pig. Didn't someone say that at some point?
Sure you can.
You can.
Well, of course you can.
The question is whether anybody's going to call it a funky-looking pig. Michael Wallman from the Brennan Center for Justice, our expert on the